The bruise on Eliza's cheekbone had turned the color of spoiled plums. She studied it in the cracked mirror above the wash basin, fingers hovering near but not quite touching the tender skin. 3 days old. It would fade to yellow-green soon, like all the others before it. "You gonna stand there all morning?" Marcus's voice cut through the thin bedroom door. Not quite shouting. He never shouted first thing in the morning. That came later, after the whiskey. "Coming?" Eliza called back, voice steady despite the way her hand shook as she tied her hair back with a frayed ribbon. The house in Copper Creek had belonged to their parents once. Now it belonged to Marcus, at least in every way that mattered. Their father's name might still be on some deed in a lawyer's office somewhere, but Papa had been dead 6 years, Mama 7, and in the absence of anyone to say otherwise, Marcus had simply taken over. The house, the furniture, the small inheritance that was supposed to see them both through. And Eliza, especially Eliza. She found him in the kitchen, already 2 cups deep into the pot of coffee she'd made at dawn. He didn't look at her when she entered, just jerked his chin toward the stove. "Eggs, and don't burn them this time." "I didn't burn them last time." The words slipped out before she could catch them. Marcus's eyes lifted then. Dark like hers, but mean with it. Mean in a way that suggested he enjoyed what came next. "You talking back to me?" Eliza's stomach dropped. "No, you just meant to tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. That what you meant?" She forced herself to breathe, to stay calm. "I'll make the eggs." "Yeah, you will." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with that look she'd learned to hate, like she was something he owned that had disappointed him. "And maybe while you're at it, you can think about what happens to girls who forget their place." She cracked 4 eggs into the pan, watched them sizzle in too much butter. Outside the window, Copper Creek was waking up. She could see dust already rising from the main street 2 blocks over, hear the distant sound of the mercantile owner opening his shutters. Normal people doing normal things. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt normal. Marcus ate without speaking. Eliza stood by the stove, her own stomach growling, knowing better than to serve herself until he'd finished. This was how mornings went. This was how every day went, really. A series of small humiliations and careful silences punctuated by moments of actual violence when she stepped wrong or spoke up or just existed in a way that irritated him. It hadn't always been like this. When Mama was alive, Marcus had been different. Sullen, yes. Difficult. But not cruel. Not like this. Something in him had broken when they died, and instead of grief, what had poured out was poison. "I need you to take something to the post office," Marcus said around a mouthful of eggs. "Letter to the land office in Carson City. About the North property." Eliza nodded. The North property was 40 acres of scrubland their father had bought years ago, thinking he'd graze cattle on it someday. Marcus had been trying to sell it for 2 years. "And pick up my new boots while you're out. Should be ready at the cobbler's." "Yes." "Yes, what?" She swallowed hard. "Yes, Marcus." He smiled then, slow and ugly. "That's better. Maybe you're learning after all." The letter sat on the table, sealed with red wax. She picked it up carefully, tucked it into her coat pocket along with the coins he tossed at her for the cobbler. Then she walked out into the morning, into the dust and noise of Copper Creek, and for just a moment, walking down those wooden sidewalks with the sun on her face, she let herself imagine never going back. The post office was quiet. Old Mister. Hendricks took the letter with barely a glance, stamped it, tossed it into the outgoing bin. Eliza watched it disappear among the others and felt nothing. The cobbler's shop was different. Usually it was just Mr. Chen, bent over his workbench with his tools and leather and that permanent smell of polish and sweat. But today there was someone else there. A man she didn't recognize, tall and weathered in the way of men who spent more time outdoors than in. He was talking to Mr. Chen about a saddle repair, his voice low and easy. 2 days, Mr. Chen was saying. Maybe 3. Stitching's bad all through the center panel. 3's fine. I'm not going anywhere. Eliza waited by the door, trying to be invisible. It was a skill she'd perfected over the years, how to take up no space, make no sound, give no one a reason to notice her. But the stranger noticed anyway. His eyes cut to her sharp and pale gray, taking her in with a single glance. She knew what he saw. The bruise, the careful way she held herself, the fact that she wouldn't quite meet his gaze. "Help you with something?" Mr. Chen asked, and it took Eliza a moment to realize he was talking to her. "Picking up boots for Marcus Thorne," she managed. Mr. Chen's expression shifted slightly. Everyone in town knew Marcus. Not many liked him, but most were smart enough to stay clear of his business. "Right. Let me get those." He disappeared into the back room. The silence that followed felt thick, oppressive. Eliza studied the floor, counted the knots in the wooden planks, anything to avoid looking at the stranger, who was still watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "That's a nasty bruise," he said finally. Her hand moved reflexively to her cheek. "I fell." "Uh-huh." He didn't sound convinced. Didn't sound like he cared whether she wanted to convince him or not. Just stood there, solid and certain, like a man who'd seen enough lies to know one when he heard it. "Mr. Chen saved her by returning with the boots, wrapped in brown paper. She paid him with Marcus's coins, took the package, and left without another word. But she could feel those gray eyes on her back all the way to the door. The walk home felt longer than it should have. Each step closer to that house made something in her chest constrict, made it harder to breathe. By the time she reached the front door, her hands were shaking again. Marcus was waiting in the parlor, bottle already open even though it wasn't yet noon. "Took you long enough." "There was a line," Eliza lied. She held out the boots. He snatched them from her, tore open the paper, examined them with the critical eye of a man looking for something to complain about. Found it too. "Stitching's sloppy on this one. Chen's getting lazy." Eliza said nothing. It was safer that way. "You know what I think?" Marcus set the boots aside, turned his attention fully to her. His eyes were already glassy from the whiskey. "I think you're getting ideas above your station, walking around town like you're somebody. But you're not somebody, Eliza. You're nobody. You understand that?" She nodded, throat tight. "Say it." "I'm nobody." "That's right. And you know what happens to nobodies who forget their place?" She knew what was coming, could see it in the way he stood, the set of his shoulders. She'd lived through it enough times to recognize the signs, but knowing didn't make it easier, didn't make it hurt less when his hand shot out and grabbed her arm, fingers digging in hard enough to leave marks. "I asked you a question." "They get reminded," Eliza whispered. "They get reminded." He shoved her backward, not hard enough to knock her down, but hard enough to send her stumbling. "That's exactly right. So maybe you need a reminder." The next 10 minutes were bad. Not the worst she'd endured, but bad enough. Marcus had learned over the years exactly how much damage he could do without leaving marks that showed. He was careful, strategic, the kind of violence that happened behind closed doors and left no witnesses. When it was over, Eliza lay on the parlor floor, ribs aching, head spinning. Marcus stood over her, breathing hard. "Clean yourself up. You look pathetic." He left. She heard his boots on the stairs, the slam of his bedroom door. Then silence. Eliza lay there for a long time. Too long, probably. But moving hurt and thinking hurt worse. She stared at the ceiling, at the water stain in the corner that looked like a map of some country she'd never visit, and let herself imagine what would happen if she just stayed here, if she just gave up. But something in her wouldn't allow it, some stubborn, buried thing that refused to break no matter how many times Marcus tried. It was small and quiet and probably foolish, but it was hers. She pulled herself up, washed her face, changed her dress for one that didn't have dust and tears on it. Then she walked to the kitchen and started preparing dinner, because that's what came next. That's what always came next. Night fell. Marcus ate, drank more. Eventually passed out in his chair, snoring loud enough to shake the windows. And Eliza sat in her room with a candle burning low and a thought taking shape in her mind. What if she left? It wasn't the first time the thought had occurred to her, but it was the first time it felt less like fantasy and more like possibility. She had nothing. No money saved, no friends to run to, nowhere to go. But she also had nothing to lose except the daily certainty of pain. She pulled out the small bag she kept under her bed, started filling it with things that mattered. Not much. A change of clothes, the photograph of her parents, Mama's wedding ring, hidden away all these years. A crust of bread and a hunk of cheese stolen from the larder. It all fit in the bag with room to spare. Her whole life, reduced to 10 pounds of cloth and sentiment. She waited until the house was silent, until Marcus's snores had settled into a deep, whiskey-soaked rhythm. Then she crept downstairs, bag in hand, heart hammering so hard she was sure it would wake him. The front door creaked. She froze, certain she'd be caught. But the snoring continued, undisturbed. Then she was outside. In the night, in the cold air and darkness and freedom. She had no plan, no destination. She just walked, heading toward the edge of town where the buildings thinned out and the desert began. If she could make it to the main road, maybe she could flag down a wagon heading east. Maybe someone would take pity on her. Maybe... She didn't see the horseman until he was almost on top of her. The animal came out of nowhere, massive and dark and moving too fast. Eliza had just enough time to register hoofbeats before instinct took over and she threw herself sideways, but not quite far enough. Something clipped her shoulder, the horse's flank maybe, or the stirrup, and sent her sprawling into the dirt. Pain exploded through her side. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, just lay there gasping like a fish on dry land while darkness crowded the edges of her vision. Then hands, strong ones, pulling her upright. "Jesus, you all right?" The voice was familiar. It took her a moment to place it through the ringing in her ears. Gray eyes, the stranger from the cobbler's shop. "I didn't see you," he was saying. His hands moved over her carefully, checking for breaks. Professional, practiced. "Damn near ran you over. Can you stand?" Eliza managed a nod, tried to get her feet under her, failed. The stranger, what had Mr. Chen called him, caught her before she went down again. "Easy, you took a hard knock." He studied her face in the moonlight, saw the bruise, older now, but still visible. Then his eyes dropped to her bag, lying a few feet away in the dust, its contents spilled out. The bread, the photograph, the wedding ring. Understanding crossed his features. Running away? There was no point in lying. Yes. He didn't ask from what, didn't ask why, just glanced back toward town, toward the house she'd fled, then back to her. "You picked a hell of a night for it. Storm coming in from the west. You'll freeze if you're out on the road." "I don't care." "Yeah, well." He bent down, started gathering her things, putting them back in the bag with careful hands. "You say that now, but you will when you're huddled under a rock somewhere wishing you were dead." "I already wish I was dead." The words came out flat, honest. They surprised her almost as much as they seemed to surprise him. He straightened, bag in hand, and looked at her with something that might have been respect. "What's your name?" "Eliza. Eliza Thorne." "Caleb Rourke." He offered his hand. She shook it, bemused. "And here's what's going to happen, Eliza Thorne. You're going to get on my horse. I'm going to take you somewhere safe. And tomorrow, when you've had food and sleep and time to think, you can decide whether you still want to run. Deal?" She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she didn't need his help, didn't need anyone. But the truth was she did need help, desperately. And something about this man, this stranger who'd nearly run her over and was now offering her kindness without asking for anything in return, made her want to trust him. "Where?" she asked. "Boarding house about 5 miles north of here. My aunt runs it. She's mean as a snake and twice as tough, but she's fair, and she doesn't tolerate men who beat women." Eliza's breath caught. "How did you—" "I've got eyes." Caleb gestured to the bruise. "And I've seen enough to know the difference between a fall and a fist. You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to. But if you're running, you should run to something, not just away. Makes the difference between surviving and living." He was right. She knew he was right. But trusting felt dangerous, felt like stepping off a cliff with no guarantee of solid ground below. Still, what other choice did she have? "Okay," she whispered. Caleb nodded once, then moved to his horse, a big bay gelding with intelligent eyes and a patient demeanor. He swung into the saddle with easy grace, then reached down. "Give me your hand." She did. His grip was strong and sure as he pulled her up behind him. She had to wrap her arms around his waist to keep from falling, had to press against his back. It was the closest she'd been to another person in years, and it felt strange. Not bad, just strange. "Hold tight," Caleb said. Then he spurred the horse forward, and Copper Creek began to fall away behind them. Eliza didn't look back, couldn't bear to, just held on and let herself be carried into the darkness, toward something unknown and terrifying and possibly, just possibly, better than what she was leaving behind. The ride took longer than 5 miles should have. The road was rough, full of ruts and rocks that made the horse pick its way carefully. Eliza's ribs ached with every jolt, but she didn't complain, just focused on breathing, on staying upright, on not thinking about what Marcus would do when he woke and found her gone. "You all right back there?" Caleb asked at one point. "Yes. You're a terrible liar." Despite everything, Eliza felt her mouth twitch, almost a smile. "I know. We're almost there." The boarding house appeared out of the darkness like something from a dream. It was bigger than she'd expected, 2 stories of weathered wood and stone, with lights burning in several windows despite the late hour. A barn stood off to one side, and she could see chickens roosting in a coop near the back. It looked lived in, loved even. Caleb dismounted, then helped her down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, but she forced them to hold. The front door opened before they reached it. A woman stepped out onto the porch, lamp in hand, expression stern. She was older than Eliza had expected, maybe 60, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. "Caleb, it's past midnight. I know, Aunt Rose, this is Eliza. She needs a place to stay." Rose's gaze moved to Eliza, took in the bruise, the bag, the way she held herself like someone expecting a blow. "Inside, you see," she said. No questions, no judgment, just a command delivered in a tone that expected obedience. Eliza obeyed. The interior of the boarding house was warm and smelled like bread and wood smoke. There was a large common room with a fireplace, several doors leading off to what Eliza assumed were guest rooms, and a staircase climbing to the second floor. Everything was clean but worn, the furniture clearly second-hand but well-maintained. "Sit," Rose ordered, pointing to a chair near the fire. Eliza sat. Rose disappeared into what must have been the kitchen, returned with a cup of something hot and a plate of cold meat and bread. "Eat." I didn't ask if you were hungry. I told you to eat." Eliza ate. The food tasted like sawdust at first, but after a few bites, her body woke up and remembered what hunger was. She finished everything on the plate, drank the tea. It was chamomile, sweet and soothing, and felt something in her chest loosen slightly. Rose watched the whole time, arms crossed. When Eliza was done, she spoke. "You running from someone?" "Yes." "He'll follow you here. He'll find trouble. You understand that?" Eliza nodded. "Good. Room's $5 a week, meals included. You work? You eat? You don't work? You don't eat. I need help with the chickens, the laundry, cooking, cleaning. You willing?" "Yes." "Then you can stay." Rose turned to Caleb. "Put the horse up, then get some sleep. You look half dead." Caleb grinned. "Good to see you too, Aunt Rose." He left. Rose showed Eliza upstairs to a small room at the end of the hall. It had a bed, a washstand, a window that looked out over the desert. Nothing fancy, but it was clean and quiet and hers. "Breakfast is at dawn," Rose said from the doorway. "Don't be late." "I won't, and Mrs. Rose, just Rose." "Rose, thank you." The older woman's expression softened slightly. "Just for a moment. Get some rest, girl. Tomorrow starts whether you're ready or not." Then she was gone, and Eliza was alone. She stood in the center of the room for a long time, just taking it in. The silence, the safety, the fact that for the first time in years she could close a door and know no one would open it without permission. Eventually, she lay down on the bed. Didn't bother changing out of her clothes, didn't even pull back the covers. Just lay there in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling around her. She didn't sleep. Couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus, heard his voice, felt his hands. But she was safe. For now, at least, she was safe. And maybe that was enough. Dawn came too early and too bright. Eliza woke to the sound of a rooster crowing somewhere below her window and the smell of coffee drifting up through the floorboards. Her body ached in places she'd forgotten existed, and for a disoriented moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then it came back. The flight. The horse. Caleb Rourke and his formidable aunt. She sat up slowly, testing her ribs. Sore, but not broken. The bruise on her face throbbed with a dull persistence. She caught her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand and barely recognized herself. Hair wild, eyes shadowed, looking more ghost than girl. Downstairs, she could hear voices. The clatter of dishes. Life happening without her. She changed into her spare dress, splashed water on her face, and made her way down. The common room was empty, but light spilled from the kitchen doorway along with the sounds of cooking. Eliza hesitated at the threshold, suddenly uncertain. What if Rose had changed her mind overnight? What if this was all some mistake? You planning to stand there all morning, or you planning to work? Rose's voice cut through her spiral. Eliza stepped into the kitchen. It was larger than Marcus's entire house, with a massive cast-iron stove dominating one wall and shelves lined with jars and tins and sacks of flour. Rose stood at the counter kneading dough, her movements efficient and practiced. She didn't look up when Eliza entered. There's coffee in the pot. Pour yourself a cup, then start on those eggs. We've got 4 guests this week, and they'll be wanting breakfast in an hour. Eliza moved to obey, grateful for clear instructions. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, bitter and hot, and exactly what she needed. She found the eggs in a basket near the pantry, counted out a dozen, and started cracking them into a bowl. You know how to cook? Rose asked. Some. My mother taught me before she died. Good, because I'm not running a charity here. You earn your keep or you leave. Understood? Yes, ma'am. Rose's hand stilled briefly in the dough. Rose, I told you last night, don't make me repeat myself. Yes, Rose. They worked in silence for a while. Eliza scrambled the eggs, fried up bacon that sizzled and popped, sliced bread from a loaf Rose had baked the day before. It felt strange to be working alongside someone instead of in fear of them. Strange, but not bad. The guests started filtering in around 7. 3 men, ranch hands from a spread 20 miles east, Rose explained, and 1 woman traveling alone to meet family in California. They ate with the focused intensity of people who did hard physical labor, barely speaking except to ask for more coffee or another slice of bread. Eliza kept to the kitchen, washing dishes and staying out of sight. Old habits. When the meal was done and the guests had scattered to their various business, Rose finally sat down with her own cup of coffee. She studied Eliza over the rim. You planning to tell me what you're running from, or am I supposed to guess? Eliza's hands stilled in the dishwater. My brother. He hit you? Yes. Often? Often enough. Rose nodded slowly, like this confirmed something she already knew. Parents? Dead? 6 years for my father, 7 for my mother. And your brother took over the household? Yes. Let me guess. Started out just being strict, then mean, then violent. And you stayed because you had nowhere else to go and no money to get there with. Eliza turned to look at her. How did you? Because I've seen it before. More times than I care to count. Rose set down her cup with a sharp click. Men like your brother, they don't start out monsters. They grow into it, feed on it. And girls like you stay because you've been told your whole life that you're supposed to endure. That suffering is noble. That if you just try harder, be better, quieter, smaller, maybe he'll stop. It's not that simple. It never is. But here's what you need to understand, girl. Simple or not, you're out now. And if you want to stay out, you need to stop thinking like prey, because prey gets caught every single time. The words hit like a slap. Eliza felt heat rise in her face. I don't know how to be anything else. Then you'll learn. Rose stood, brushed flour from her apron. Caleb's out in the barn. When you're done here, go find him. He'll show you the rest of the chores. She left before Eliza could respond. Left her standing in the kitchen with her hands dripping dishwater and her mind reeling. The barn smelled like hay and horses and leather. Eliza found Caleb mucking out stalls, his shirt already stained with sweat despite the early hour. He looked up when she entered, a slight smile crossing his weathered face. "Survived breakfast with Rose, I see." "Barely," he laughed. It was a good sound, easy and genuine. "She grows on you, like a fungus." "I heard that," Rose's voice called from somewhere outside. Caleb's grin widened. "Come on, I'll show you around." The property was bigger than Eliza had realized in the dark. Besides the main house and barn, there was a chicken coop, a vegetable garden, a smokehouse, and a well with the clearest water she'd ever seen. Caleb walked her through each task with patient detail, how Rose liked the eggs collected, where to dump the slop for the pigs they kept out back, which tools went where. "You ever work a ranch before?" he asked as they scattered feed for the chickens. "No, just kept house for my brother." "This'll be different then. Harder in some ways, easier in others." He paused, watching her carefully. "You sleep at all last night?" "Not much." "Figured. You've got that look. Like a spooked horse." Eliza bristled. "I'm fine." "Didn't say you weren't, just said you look spooked. And there's no shame in it. What you did, leaving like that, took guts. Most people never manage it. Most people probably have somewhere to go." "Maybe. Or maybe they just convince themselves they do." Caleb tossed the last handful of feed, dusted off his hands. "Point is, you made it out. That's the hard part. And the easy part? There isn't one. But at least now you get to decide what comes next instead of having it decided for you." They worked through the morning, falling into a rhythm that surprised Eliza with its ease. Caleb didn't talk much, but when he did, it was straightforward and without judgment. He showed her how to pump water from the well without straining her back, how to tell which eggs were fresh and which were starting to turn, how to handle the chickens without getting pecked to pieces. "They can smell fear," he explained after one particularly aggressive hen went for Eliza's hand. "You've got to be firm. Let them know you're not food." "I'm not sure I believe that." "Suit yourself. But you'll learn quick once you've been pecked enough times." By noon, Eliza was exhausted. Her ribs ached, her hands were blistered, and she was fairly certain she smelled like a combination of chicken manure and horse sweat. But there was something satisfying about it too, something real. She'd worked hard and accomplished things, and no one had screamed at her or told her she was worthless. Lunch was simple: leftover bread and cheese, cold chicken, water from the well. They ate in the kitchen, just the three of them. The guests were all out on various errands. "There's a town meeting tonight," Rose said abruptly. "Up at the church. You should stay here." Eliza looked up. "Why?" "Because people talk. And if your brother comes looking, I'd rather he not find out too easy where you are." The food turned to ash in Eliza's mouth. "You think he'll come?" "I think men like him don't like losing what they think belongs to them. So, yes, I think he'll come eventually. Question is whether we're ready when he does." "I can leave. I don't want to bring trouble." "Who said anything about leaving?" Rose's tone was sharp. "You stay. We prepare. That's how this works." Caleb had been quiet through this exchange, but now he leaned forward. "Rose is right. Running again won't solve anything. It'll just put you back on the road with nowhere to go. Better to make a stand somewhere defensible." "I don't even know how to make a stand," Eliza said quietly. "I don't know how to fight." "Then we'll teach you." The words hung in the air between them. Eliza wanted to argue, wanted to say it was impossible, that she was too weak, too broken, too much of a coward. But something in Caleb's gray eyes stopped her. He looked at her like she was capable of more than she believed, like he saw something in her worth defending. "Okay," she whispered. The afternoon passed in a blur of more chores. Eliza helped Rose prepare dinner for the guests, learned how to properly set a table, how to serve without being intrusive. The work was endless, but it gave her hands something to do and her mind something to focus on besides the growing dread in her stomach. As evening fell, Rose and Caleb left for the town meeting. Eliza stayed behind as instructed, cleaning up after dinner and then retreating to her room. She tried to read from a book she'd found on a shelf in the common room, something about the history of the California gold rush, but the words wouldn't stick. Her mind kept circling back to Marcus, to what he'd do when he found her. Because Rose was right. He would come. It was only a question of when. She must have dozed off eventually, because she woke to the sound of horses in the yard. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought it was Marcus, thought he'd found her already. But then she heard Rose's voice, sharp and annoyed, and Caleb's low response. Eliza made her way downstairs. Rose was in the kitchen making tea, her face tight with displeasure. "Meeting go badly?" Eliza asked. "Meetings always go badly when Samuel Fletcher's involved. Man's got opinions on everything and sense about nothing." Rose poured the tea with jerky movements. "But that's not what's got me riled." "Then what?" Rose exchanged a look with Caleb, who'd followed them in and was leaning against the doorframe. "Someone was asking about you," he said. Eliza's blood went cold. "Who?" "Man named Garrett. Works for the land office over in Copper Creek. Said Marcus Thorne sent him to ask if anyone had seen his sister. Said she'd run off and he was worried about her." "Worried." The word came out bitter. "He's not worried. He's angry." "We figured as much," Rose said, "which is why Caleb told him we hadn't seen anyone matching your description." "You lied for me?" "We told a strategic untruth," Rose corrected. "Different thing entirely, but it means Marcus knows you left town. He'll be looking. And eventually someone's going to tell him about the girl who showed up here in the middle of the night with bruises on her face and fear in her eyes." Eliza sat down heavily. The brief sense of safety she'd felt evaporated, replaced by the familiar weight of dread. "I should leave. Before he comes here." "And go where?" Caleb's voice was calm but firm. "Back on the road? Another town where you don't know anyone and have no protection? At least here you've got people who'll stand with you." "You don't even know me. Why would you stand with me?" "Because it's the right thing to do," Rose said simply. "And because I don't like bullies. Never have." Something in Eliza's chest cracked at that. These people, these near strangers, were willing to risk trouble for her. It was more than anyone had done in years. "What do I do?" she asked. "First, you stop looking like you've already lost," Caleb said. He pushed off from the doorframe, crossed to where she sat. "Second, you learn to defend yourself. If Marcus comes, when he comes, you need to be ready. I told you I don't know how to fight, which is why I'm going to teach you." He held out his hand. "Come on." They went outside into the yard behind the barn where the light from the house didn't quite reach. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like thrown salt. Caleb lit a lantern and hung it from a fence post. "First lesson," he said, "stop apologizing for taking up space. I didn't. You did, with your posture. The way you make yourself small. I understand why, but it's a tell. Shows anyone looking that you're used to being hit. Makes you a target." Eliza straightened unconsciously. Caleb nodded. "Better? Now if someone comes at you, what's your instinct?" "To move away." "Wrong. You close the distance. Get inside their reach where they can't build momentum." He demonstrated, stepping close enough that Eliza had to tilt her head back to see his face. "Like this. Then you go for vulnerable spots, eyes, throat, groin. You're not trying to win a fair fight. You're trying to survive long enough to run." "I don't think I can do this." "You can. You just don't believe it yet." He stepped back, gave her space. "Try it. Come at me like you mean it." Eliza hesitated. The idea of attacking someone, even in practice, felt wrong. Dangerous. "I'm not going to hurt you," Caleb said, reading her expression. "And you're not going to hurt me. This is just practice. But you need to commit to it. Half measures get you killed." She took a breath, then another. Then she lunged forward, clumsy and uncertain. Caleb sidestepped easily. Again. She tried again, and again. Each time he evaded or blocked, patient and methodical. After the 10th attempt, Eliza was breathing hard and frustration was building in her chest. "This is pointless. I'm too slow, too weak." "You're thinking too much. Stop trying to do it right and just do it." "That doesn't make any sense." "Doesn't have to make sense. Has to work." He reset his stance. "One more time. And this time don't think about form or technique. Think about every time your brother hit you, every time he made you feel small, every time he told you that you were nothing, and then hit me like you mean it." Something shifted in Eliza at those words. Heat flooded through her, not embarrassment this time, but anger. Real anger, the kind she'd been swallowing down for years. She thought about Marcus, about his fists and his words, and the way he'd taken everything from her, about the girl she used to be before he'd beaten her into a shape he could control. She lunged. This time when she struck out, Caleb had to actually block. Her fist connected with his forearm with a solid thump that sent shock up her arm. "There," he said, and there was approval in his voice. "That's what I'm talking about. Do it again." They practiced for an hour. By the end, Eliza was drenched in sweat and her knuckles were raw, but something had loosened in her chest. Some tight, scared knot had started to unravel. "You did good," Caleb said as they walked back to the house. "Better than I expected for the first night. I barely landed anything." "You landed enough, and more importantly, you stopped apologizing." He paused at the door. "This isn't going to be easy. Learning to fight after you've spent years learning to endure. But you're stronger than you think. You just need to remember that." Inside, Rose was waiting with hot water for washing and leftover stew from dinner. Eliza ate mechanically, too tired to taste much. When she finally made it upstairs to her room, she collapsed onto the bed fully clothed and fell into a sleep so deep it felt like drowning. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Mornings started before dawn with breakfast preparations. Then came the endless cycle of chores, feeding animals, collecting eggs, washing linens, preparing meals, cleaning up after meals. The work was hard and constant, but Eliza found she didn't mind. It gave her purpose, made her useful in a way that didn't involve subjugating herself. And every night, after the guests had retired and Rose had gone to bed, Caleb took her out behind the barn and taught her to fight. They started with the basics: how to make a fist without breaking her thumb, where to strike to cause maximum damage, how to use her weight and momentum instead of relying on strength she didn't have. Caleb was patient but demanding, pushing her past the point where she wanted to quit and into the space where instinct took over. "Pain is just information," he told her one night after she'd taken a spill and skinned her palms. "It tells you what's wrong, but it doesn't have to stop you. The question is whether you let it control you or you control it. Easy for you to say. You're not the one bleeding. I've bled plenty, still do. Difference is, I learned not to let it slow me down." He handed her a cloth to wrap her hands. "You want to quit for tonight?" "No?" "Good. Then get up." By the end of the second week, Eliza could throw a decent punch. By the end of the third, she'd actually managed to knock Caleb back a step when she caught him off guard. The look of surprise on his face was worth every bruised knuckle. But it wasn't just fighting he taught her. During the day while they worked, Caleb showed her other things: how to read the land, how to tell if someone was approaching by the sound of their horse, how to move quietly when you needed to, and how to make yourself loud when you wanted to be heard. Small skills that added up to something bigger: awareness, preparedness, the ability to see trouble coming instead of just enduring it when it arrived. "You're teaching me to be paranoid," Eliza said one afternoon as they mended fence posts. "I'm teaching you to be careful. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Paranoid means seeing threats that aren't there. Careful means being ready for the ones that are." He drove a post into the ground with 3 solid strikes. "Your brother's a real threat. Preparing for him isn't paranoia. It's survival." As if summoned by the mention of him, trouble came on a Tuesday. Eliza was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard the horse. Single rider, moving fast, coming up the main road from town. She stood, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun, and felt her stomach drop. She didn't recognize the horse, but she recognized the way the rider sat, arrogant and assured, like he owned whatever ground he happened to be standing on. Marcus. He'd found her. Eliza's first instinct was to run. Just drop the weeds and bolt for the house, hide in her room and pretend she wasn't there. But Caleb's voice echoed in her head. "Stop acting like prey." So instead she stayed where she was, hands clenched around the weeds, and watched her brother ride into the yard. He looked the same. Dark hair, dark eyes, that cruel set to his mouth that she knew so well. He swung down from his horse with casual grace and stood there surveying the property like he was thinking about buying it. Then his eyes found her. "There you are." His voice carried across the yard, pleasant and mild. the voice he used in public when he wanted people to think he was reasonable. "I've been looking for you, Eliza. You had me worried sick." She didn't respond, couldn't make her voice work. Marcus took a step closer. "Aren't you going to say hello? I've come all this way." "What do you want?" The words came out steadier than she felt. "Want? I want my sister to come home, where she belongs." Another step. He was only 10 feet away now, close enough that she could see the red veins in his eyes, smell the whiskey on his breath even from here. "You've caused a lot of trouble running off like that. People are talking, asking questions. Let them talk." His expression shifted. Just for a moment, the mask slipped and she saw the anger underneath. "You ungrateful little—" "There a problem here?" Rose's voice cut across the yard like a whip crack. She'd come out onto the porch without either of them noticing, and she stood there now with her arms crossed and a look on her face that could curdle milk. Marcus turned, assessing her with quick calculation. "No problem, ma'am. Just collecting my sister. She ran away from home and I've come to bring her back." "She didn't run away. She left. And she's staying. With all due respect, this is a family matter. It's got nothing to do with you. It's got everything to do with me when she's under my roof and you're on my property uninvited." Rose descended the porch steps slowly, deliberately. "And I'm telling you to leave." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Eliza, get your things. We're going." Eliza felt the old fear rising, the old instinct to obey. But underneath it was something new. Something that had been growing over the past 3 weeks of early mornings and hard work and evening lessons behind the barn. "No." The word came out quiet but clear. Marcus stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. "What did you say?" "I said no. I'm not going anywhere with you." For a moment, just a heartbeat, she saw genuine shock on his face. Then it twisted into fury. "You little—" He lunged forward. Eliza's body moved before her mind caught up. Just like Caleb had taught her, she stepped into the attack instead of away, getting inside Marcus's reach. Her fist came up hard and caught him under the ribs. Not enough to stop him, but enough to make him grunt and stagger. Then Rose was there, and Caleb too. He must have been in the barn. And suddenly Marcus was on the ground with Caleb's knee in his back and his arm twisted at an angle that had to hurt. "I think," Caleb said conversationally, "that the lady told you to leave." Marcus thrashed once, then went still when Caleb applied more pressure. "You're making a mistake. She's my sister. I have a legal right. You have the right to get off this property before I have you arrested for trespassing." Rose's voice was ice. "And if you come back, I'll have you arrested for assault. I've got 3 witnesses who just saw you try to attack a woman half your size. This isn't over. For your sake, boy, I hope it is." Caleb hauled Marcus to his feet and marched him to his horse. Marcus climbed into the saddle, glaring down at all of them with such hatred that Eliza felt it like a physical weight. "You think you can hide here forever, he said, looking directly at her. "You think these people will protect you when things get difficult? You're nothing, Eliza. You've always been nothing, and sooner or later you'll remember that." Then he spurred his horse and rode off, dust rising in his wake. Eliza stood frozen until he disappeared from sight. Then her legs gave out and she sat down hard in the dirt, shaking so badly her teeth chattered. Rose crouched beside her. "You all right?" "I hit him." The words came out wondering, disbelieving. "I actually hit him." "You did more than that. You stood your ground. That took courage." "It took stupidity. He'll come back. He'll come back with I don't know what. But he won't let this go." "Probably not," Caleb agreed. He offered her a hand up. "But next time we'll be ready, and so will you." That night, they didn't practice fighting. Instead, they sat in the kitchen and made plans. Rose knew the sheriff in the nearest town with an actual law office, a man who owed her a favor. She'd send word, explain the situation, see if there was any legal recourse. Caleb talked about securing the property, making it harder for anyone to approach unseen. And Eliza listened, still half convinced this was all a dream she'd wake from any moment. "He meant what he said," she told them finally, "about coming back. Marcus doesn't forgive and he doesn't forget." "Neither do I," Rose said. Her eyes were hard as flint. "He wants a fight. He'll get one. But he won't get you. Not while I'm breathing." Later, alone in her room, Eliza looked at her hands. The knuckles were scraped from where she'd hit Marcus, the nails broken from weeks of hard work. They didn't look like her hands anymore. Didn't look like the hands of the girl who'd fled Copper Creek a month ago. She thought about what Marcus had said, that she was nothing, that she'd always been nothing. But sitting there in her small room in Rose's boarding house, with the smell of bread from the kitchen and the sound of Caleb checking the locks downstairs, she didn't feel like nothing. She felt like someone who'd taken a first step toward becoming whoever she was supposed to be. It wasn't much, but it was hers. And maybe that was enough for now. The waiting was worse than anything Marcus had done to her directly. 3 days passed, then a week, then 2. Every sound made Eliza jump. Every horse on the road sent her pulse racing. She slept with a knife under her pillow, one Caleb had given her from his own collection, and woke at the slightest noise, heart hammering against her ribs. But Marcus didn't come. Not yet. "He's planning something," Eliza said one morning as she and Rose kneaded bread in the kitchen. Her hands worked the dough with more force than necessary, punching it down like she could beat her anxiety into submission. "That's what he does. He waits until you think you're safe, and then he strikes." Rose didn't argue with her. That was one thing Eliza had come to appreciate about the older woman. She never offered empty reassurances. Maybe, or maybe he realized he'd bitten off more than he could chew and decided to leave you alone. "You don't believe that?" "No, but I'm trying to be optimistic." Rose shaped her dough into a neat round and set it aside to rise. The sheriff sent word back. Said there's not much he can do unless Marcus actually commits a crime. Harassment's hard to prove, and family disputes aren't usually something the law gets involved in. Eliza had expected as much, but the confirmation still felt like a punch to the gut. So he can just show up whenever he wants, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. "I didn't say that. I said the law won't help. That's different." Rose wiped her hands on her apron, left flour fingerprints on the dark fabric. "We've got options the sheriff doesn't have. Less legal ones, but more effective." "Like what?" "Like making it clear to your brother that coming here again would be a very bad decision." Rose's smile was sharp as broken glass. "I've been running this place for 20 years. You don't last that long out here without learning how to handle trouble." Before Eliza could ask what that meant, one of the guests called from the common room asking for more coffee. She went to deal with it, leaving Eliza alone with her thoughts and the rising bread. The days continued their pattern. Work from dawn until dusk, practice fighting with Caleb in the evenings, collapse into bed too exhausted to do anything but sleep. Eliza's hands developed calluses. Her arms grew stronger from hauling water and lifting feed sacks. The permanent ache in her ribs finally faded, replaced by the healthy soreness of muscles being used properly. She was changing. She could feel it happening, like a snake shedding its skin. The frightened girl who'd fled Copper Creek was still there, still whispering that she should run, that she was making things worse by staying. But another voice had joined it, louder now, getting stronger. The voice that said she had a right to exist without fear, that she deserved better than what Marcus had given her. "You're getting faster," Caleb observed one evening as they sparred. He blocked her punch, but had to actually work at it this time. "And you're not telegraphing as much. Your eyes used to give away every move before you made it. Is that good or bad?" "It's progress, which is all anyone can ask for." He reset his stance. Again. They went through the drills until full dark, until Eliza's shirt was soaked with sweat and her lungs burned. When Caleb finally called an end to it, she bent over with her hands on her knees, gasping. "I have a question," she said when she could breathe again. "Ask it. Why are you doing this? You and Rose both. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything, but you're risking trouble with Marcus, spending time training me, giving me a place to stay." She straightened, met his eyes. "Why?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked over to the water barrel, filled 2 tin cups, handed her one. He drank half of his before answering. "I had a sister once," he said finally. "Grace, 3 years younger than me. Prettiest girl in Carson City," everyone said. "She married a man named Thomas Webb when she was 17. Seemed like a good match. He had money, prospects. Our parents approved." He paused, staring into his cup like he could see the past reflected there. "Thomas was charming right up until the wedding. Then he changed, started drinking, started hitting. Grace tried to hide it, but I could see the bruises, the way she flinched when he moved too fast. I tried to get her to leave, told her she could stay with me, that I'd protect her. His jaw tightened. She said she couldn't, said it was her duty as a wife, that she'd made her choice and had to live with it. Eliza felt something cold settle in her stomach. What happened? He killed her, beat her so bad one night that she never woke up. They called it an accident at first, said she'd fallen down the stairs. But I knew. Everyone knew. Thomas left town before the law could ask too many questions. Last I heard, he'd married again, probably doing the same thing to some other poor girl. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Just don't be like her. Caleb looked at her then, and his eyes were full of something fierce and painful. When you showed up that night, bruised and running, you reminded me of Grace. Same look in your eyes, same way of making yourself small. And I thought, here's a chance to do what I couldn't do for my sister, to help someone get out before it's too late. I'm not your sister. No, but you could be alive this time next year. That's more than Grace got. He drained his cup, tossed the dregs into the dirt. So that's why, because I couldn't save her, but maybe I can help you save yourself. They walked back to the house in silence. Eliza turned his words over in her mind, trying to process them. She'd thought she understood why Caleb was helping her. Kindness, maybe. Moral obligation. But this was different. This was personal. This was grief turned into action. It made her want to work harder, to prove his faith in her wasn't misplaced. The next morning brought a stranger to the boarding house. A man on a gray horse, well-dressed but dusty from the road. He asked for a room and meals for 3 days, paid in advance with clean bills that suggested either honest work or successful crime. Rose took his money and his name, Arthur Finch, he said, passing through on business, and showed him to one of the upstairs rooms. Keep an eye on that one, she told Eliza after he'd gone up. Something about him feels wrong. Wrong how? Can't say exactly, just a feeling. Rose moved to the window, watched the yard with narrowed eyes. Trust your instincts out here. They're usually right. Eliza tried to follow that advice, but her instincts were still learning to speak up instead of shut down. She watched Arthur Finch carefully over dinner that night, looking for whatever Rose had sensed. He was polite, quiet, ate his food without complaint and asked intelligent questions about the area. Nothing obviously suspicious, but there was something in the way his eyes moved, how they cataloged every exit, every person, every potential threat or opportunity, like a man used to trouble. After dinner, Eliza helped Rose clean up, while Caleb and Arthur sat in the common room with coffee. She could hear them talking, their voices low and indistinct. He asked about you, Caleb said when he came into the kitchen later. Eliza's hands stilled in the dishwater. What did he say? Wanted to know who you were, where you came from. I told him you worked for Rose, and that was all he needed to know. Caleb leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Could be nothing. Could be he's just making conversation. But it might not be nothing, Rose finished. Might be your brother sent someone to scout us out before making his next move. That seems paranoid. That seems careful, Rose corrected. There's a difference. They kept Arthur Finch under watch for the next 2 days. He didn't do anything overtly suspicious, went for rides during the day, ate his meals, made polite conversation, but Eliza noticed how he always positioned himself to see the doors, how he never fully relaxed, how his hand sometimes went to his hip where a gun would be, even though he wasn't wearing one that she could see. On his last morning, he approached Eliza while she was feeding the chickens. Miss Thorne, isn't it? She spun around, scattering feed. I never told you my name. No, but I make it my business to know things. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I have a message for you, from your brother. Eliza's blood went cold. I don't want any message from him. Nevertheless, I'm being paid to deliver it. Arthur pulled a folded paper from his pocket, held it out. He wants you to know that he's willing to forgive this little rebellion, that you can come home and things will go back to the way they were. All you have to do is leave with me today. And if I don't, then he'll come get you himself, and he won't be alone. Arthur's expression didn't change, but something in his tone sharpened. I've been paid to offer you this chance, Miss Thorne. I'd advise you to take it. Men like your brother don't take kindly to being embarrassed, and you've embarrassed him quite badly. She's not going anywhere. Caleb's voice came from behind Eliza. She turned to see him standing there with a rifle held casually in one hand, not quite pointed at Arthur, but not quite pointed away either. Arthur raised his hand slightly. No need for that, friend. I'm just delivering a message. Message delivered. Now you can leave. I was planning to. Today, in fact. Arthur looked at Eliza. Think about what I said. You've got 1 week before your brother's patience runs out. After that, well, I can't say what he'll do, but I doubt you'll like it. He walked away back toward the house to collect his things. Caleb lowered the rifle but didn't relax. We need to prepare, he said quietly. He's coming, and soon. Rose agreed. That afternoon they called in favors. Rose sent word to the neighboring ranches, to people who owed her money or time or just respect. By evening, 2 men had shown up offering to help. Ranch hands named Tom and Jesse, who'd stayed at the boarding house before and remembered Rose's kindness when they'd been down on their luck. We can spare a few days, Tom said. He was older, maybe 50, with scars on his hands and a face like weathered leather. If there's trouble coming, seems right to help. Jesse was younger but no less serious. He carried a shotgun with the easy familiarity of someone who knew how to use it. Marcus Thorne, you said? I know that name. He's got a reputation in Copper Creek. Not a good one. Which is why we need to be ready, Caleb said. He'd spread a rough map of the property on the kitchen table, weighted down at the corners with coffee cups. The house is defensible. Good sight lines, only 2 ways in unless you want to break windows. But the barn's exposed and the chicken coop's too far from the house to protect properly. They spent the evening making plans. Who would watch which approach? Where to position themselves if shooting started? What to do with the guests if trouble came? Get them into the root cellar, Rose said. It was the most protected space on the property. Eliza listened and felt like she was watching someone else's life. This couldn't be real. People didn't prepare for sieges in the modern age. They didn't talk calmly about killing zones and ammunition supplies like they were discussing the weather. But they did. Because Marcus was coming, and when he did, he'd bring violence with him. What about me? Eliza asked when there was a pause in the planning. Where do you want me? The men exchanged glances. It was Rose who answered. In the house, helping me reload and watching the back approaches. You're learning, but you're not ready for a real fight. I should be able to defend myself. That's what all this training was for. Training and actual combat are different things, Caleb said. Not unkind, just factual. When bullets start flying, people freeze. Trained soldiers freeze. You've been at this a few weeks. I'm not risking you out there. Eliza wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could handle it, but the truth was she didn't know if she could. The thought of Marcus coming at her with a gun instead of his fists made her stomach turn over. Okay, she said quietly. I'll stay in the house. The week Arthur Finch had mentioned crawled by like a wounded animal. Every day felt stretched thin, hours lasting too long and not long enough simultaneously. The guests noticed the tension. It was hard not to when armed men were walking patrol around the property, and 2 of them left early. The woman heading to California looked genuinely frightened when she departed, certain she was leaving just before something terrible happened. She wasn't wrong. Marcus came on the 8th day, not with stealth or subtlety, but with a show of force designed to intimidate. Eliza saw them first. She was upstairs changing bed linens when she heard horses. Too many horses. She went to the window and felt her heart stop. There were 6 of them. Marcus in the lead on his black gelding, and 5 men she didn't recognize flanking him, all armed, all looking like the kind of people you cross the street to avoid. Rose! Her voice came out higher than she intended. They're here! The house erupted into motion. Rose rang the bell they'd set up to alert the men outside. Tom and Jesse came running from their posts. Caleb appeared from the barn, rifle already in hand. The remaining guests, just one now, an old man who'd refused to leave, was hustled down to the root cellar with promises that everything would be fine. It was a lie, but a necessary one. Marcus stopped his horse 50 yards from the house, far enough that they couldn't easily rush him, close enough that his voice would carry. Eliza. He sounded almost cheerful. Come on out. Let's talk about this like reasonable people. Caleb positioned himself on the porch, rifle resting across his arms. She doesn't want to talk to you. Turn around and leave. This is between me and my sister. You don't want to get involved in family business. Too late. Already involved. And I'm telling you one more time, leave. Marcus's expression hardened. You're making a mistake. All of you. I'm within my rights to retrieve my sister. She's family. She belongs with me. She's 22 years old, as Rose called from one of the upstairs windows. She belongs wherever she damn well pleases, and she pleases to be here. So you can take your hired thugs and get off my land. Or what? You'll shoot us? Marcus laughed. You're outnumbered and outgunned. You really want to die over some girl who's not even worth the trouble? Eliza stood back from the window, heart racing. She could see the men with Marcus shifting in their saddles, hands moving toward weapons. This was really happening. After weeks of waiting and preparing and hoping maybe it wouldn't come to this, here they were, on the edge of violence. Last warning, Caleb said. His voice was steady as stone. Leave now, or we make you leave. You can try. Marcus raised his hand. For a moment, everything hung suspended. 6 men on horseback facing 4 people in and around a boarding house, all of them armed, all of them waiting to see who would break first. Then Marcus dropped his hand and everything went to hell. The first shots came from Marcus's men. Wild and poorly aimed, more meant to scare than kill. But they still punched holes in the porch railing and shattered one of the downstairs windows. Rose returned fire from the upper window, her rifle cracking sharp and precise. One of Marcus's men yelped and grabbed his shoulder. Caleb fired next, aiming for the horses. The animals panicked, rearing and screaming. 2 of Marcus's men lost their seats and hit the ground hard. Tom and Jesse opened up from their positions flanking the house, their shots more measured and deliberate. Marcus and his remaining mounted men retreated out of easy rifle range, regrouping. Eliza watched from her window, hands gripping the sill so tight her knuckles went white. This was real. This was actually happening. People were shooting at each other because of her. Eliza! Rose's voice snapped her back to the moment. Get away from that window and help me reload. She obeyed, crossing to where Rose had set up a makeshift station with boxes of ammunition and spare rifles. Her hand shook as she tried to load cartridges, fumbling them twice before getting it right. Breathe, Rose said curtly. You panic. You're useless. We need you thinking clearly. Eliza forced herself to take a breath, then another, made her hands steady through sheer force of will. Below, Caleb was shouting orders. The 2 men who'd been thrown from their horses were scrambling for cover. Marcus and the others had dismounted and were using their horses as shields while they regrouped. They're going to try to get closer, Rose said, tracking them through the window. Under cover of dark, probably. We need to hold them off until then and hope they give up. And if they don't give up, then we're in for a long night. The siege settled into an ugly pattern. Marcus's men would try to advance, moving from cover to cover. The defenders would drive them back with rifle fire. No one had been killed yet, not that Eliza could see, but blood had been spilled on both sides. Tom had taken a graze across his ribs that left his shirt red. One of Marcus's men was down and not moving. Hours passed. The sun sank toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and red. Eliza helped Rose reload, carried water and ammunition, watched the approaches for any sign of movement. Every nerve in her body felt electric, alive in a terrible way. They're going to come after dark, Caleb said during a lull in the fighting. He'd come inside to check on them, his face streaked with powder smoke. Try to set fire to the barn, maybe, or rush the house when we can't see them coming. So what do? We make sure we can see them. He grabbed a coil of rope from the supply closet. There's oil lamps in the barn. I'm going to set them up around the perimeter, create a kill zone of light. Anyone tries to cross it, we'll see them clear as day. That's suicide. Rose said flatly. You'll be exposed the whole time. Got a better idea? She didn't. None of them did. Caleb slipped out the back door as full dark fell. Eliza watched from the kitchen window, tracking his shadow as he moved toward the barn. Marcus's men must have seen him too, because shots started coming from the tree line. But Caleb was fast and kept low, making himself a difficult target. He made it to the barn. A minute later, the first lamp flared to life. Then another, and another. Within 10 minutes, he'd created a rough circle of light around the house, eliminating the cover of darkness. He was heading back when one of Marcus's men broke from cover, running toward him with a knife drawn. Eliza saw it happen like it was moving through water, too slow and too fast simultaneously. She opened her mouth to scream a warning, but Jesse was faster. His shotgun roared and the man went down in a heap. Caleb made it back to the house, breathing hard. "That's going to make them angry," he said. He was right. Within minutes, Marcus's men opened up with everything they had. Bullets hammered the house like hail, shattering windows and punching through the wooden walls. Eliza threw herself flat, covering her head with her hands as splinters rained down around her. "Return fire!" Rose shouted. "Don't let them think they've got us pinned!" They fired back, a ragged volley that sent Marcus's men diving for cover. The exchange went on for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Smoke filled the air, thick and acrid. Eliza's ears rang from the gunfire. She couldn't think, could barely breathe, just loaded and passed weapons, and tried not to imagine what would happen if Marcus's men made it inside. Then, through the chaos, she heard it, a sound that made her blood freeze. Crackling, popping, the hungry sound of fire catching hold. "The barn," Jesse said from his position at the front window. "They've set the barn on fire." Eliza scrambled to the window, looked out. Flames were already climbing the barn's far wall, spreading fast through the dry wood. The horses inside were screaming, terrified. "We have to get them out," she said. "We can't," Caleb replied. His voice was grim. "We open that barn door, they'll shoot whoever goes through it. So we just let them burn? We don't have a choice." But standing there, listening to those animals scream, Eliza realized she did have a choice. She could stay here where it was relatively safe and let the horses die. Or she could do what she'd been training for, what all of this had been about. She could stop being afraid. Before anyone could stop her, she grabbed one of the rifles, checked that it was loaded, and ran for the back door. "Eliza, no!" Rose's voice followed her, but she was already outside, already moving. The back of the barn was fully engulfed now, flames reaching toward the night sky. But the front was still clear. She ran for it, keeping low, expecting bullets to find her any second. They didn't. Marcus's men were all focused on the front of the house, thinking they had everyone pinned. They hadn't seen her break cover. She reached the barn door, threw it open. Smoke poured out, thick and choking. Inside, the horses were throwing themselves against their stalls in panic. Eliza wrapped her scarf around her face and plunged into the smoke. It was like drowning in hot ash. She couldn't see, could barely breathe, but she could hear the horses, could find the stalls by feel. She threw open the first one, and the horse inside, Caleb's bay, bolted past her toward freedom. Then the second stall. The third. Something groaned overhead. The support beam, weakening from the fire. Eliza looked up just in time to see it starting to fall. Then hands grabbed her, pulled her backward. She hit the ground outside the barn just as the beam came down with a crash that shook the earth. Caleb dragged her further from the building, both of them coughing and gasping. "What were you thinking?" he demanded when he could speak. "I was thinking I'm tired of hiding." Eliza pulled herself to her feet, swaying. "I'm tired of being the victim. I'm tired of—" A shout from the house cut her off. One of Marcus's men had used the distraction of the fire to get close, was almost to the porch. Rose fired and missed. The man reached the door, started to push it open. Eliza didn't think, just raised the rifle she'd somehow kept hold of through everything and pulled the trigger. The recoil knocked her back a step. The shot went wide, but it was close enough to make the man dive for cover, close enough to give Tom time to get a clear shot. He took it. The man fell and didn't get up. Eliza stood there, rifle still raised, and felt something fundamental shift inside her. She'd pulled the trigger, had tried to hurt someone, maybe even kill them, and she didn't feel guilty about it. She felt alive. "Nice shot," Caleb said quietly beside her. "I missed. But you took it. That's what matters." More gunfire erupted from the house, keeping Marcus's remaining men pinned. The barn collapsed fully, sending a pillar of sparks into the night sky. And somewhere in the darkness, Eliza heard horses running, not toward the fight, but away from it. The sound of retreat. When the sun finally rose, Marcus and his men were gone. They'd pulled back during the night, taking their wounded and dead with them. The property looked like a war zone. The barn was nothing but charred timbers and ash. The house was riddled with bullet holes. Broken glass littered the porch. But they'd held. They'd survived. Eliza sat on what remained of the porch steps, too exhausted to move. Her clothes were black with soot. Her hands were blistered. She smelled like smoke and gunpowder and fear. And she'd never felt stronger in her life. Rose found her there an hour later, still sitting in the ashes and early morning light. The older woman lowered herself onto the step with a grunt, joints protesting the movement. She didn't say anything at first, just sat there looking at the devastation. "You did a damn fool thing last night," she said finally. "Running out to that barn like that." "I know." "Could have gotten yourself killed." "I know that too." Rose was quiet for another moment. Then she reached over and squeezed Eliza's shoulder. Just once, brief but firm. "But you saved those horses, and you didn't freeze when it mattered, so I suppose damn fool and brave sometimes look the same from certain angles." Eliza felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. "Is everyone all right?" "Tom's going to need his ribs wrapped proper, and Jesse took a bullet through his leg that's going to bother him for a while. But they'll both live. The old man in the cellar is scared witless but unharmed, and Caleb's already talking about rebuilding the barn before winter." Rose's expression hardened. "We were lucky. This could have gone much worse." "It's not over though, is it? Marcus will come back." "Maybe. But not tonight. Not this week. He lost men last night, at least 2 dead that I saw, maybe more wounded. That kind of loss makes people reconsider their choices." Rose stood with effort, brushed ash from her skirt. "Come on, we've got work to do." The work was endless and grueling. They spent the morning pulling the wounded men into the house to be tended properly. Tom's ribs weren't broken, but they were badly bruised, each breath making him wince. Jesse's leg wound was worse. The bullet had gone clean through the meat of his thigh, but missed the bone. Rose cleaned it with whiskey while he bit down on a leather strap, and Eliza held his hand. "You did good last night," Jesse managed when Rose was done and had bandaged him up. His face was gray with pain, but his eyes were clear. "Both of you. Don't know many women who'd stand their ground like that." "Don't know many men who'd stand with us against their own kind," Rose replied. "So I'd say we're even." By afternoon, word had spread. The sheriff from 3 towns over finally showed up with 2 deputies, all of them looking grim and uncomfortable. The sheriff was a heavy-set man named Garrett, with a mustache that drooped past his chin and eyes that had seen too much. "Heard there was trouble out here," he said, surveying the damage. "Looks like I heard right." Rose told him what had happened, laying out the facts with brutal efficiency. Marcus Thorne had come with armed men. They'd fired first. The defenders had returned fire. Men had died on both sides. "You got witnesses to him firing first, Bershaw?" Garrett asked. "5 of us saw it, plus the guest we had sheltering in the cellar. And the dead men. You know who they were?" "Hired guns, drifters, the kind of men who'll do anything for money and don't ask questions about whether it's legal." "See, sound tassunturase." Garrett chewed on this information like it tasted bad. "This is a complicated situation. Family dispute turned into a range war. Law doesn't much like getting involved in either of those things." "The law doesn't like it because the law is lazy," Rose said flatly. "Marcus Thorne tried to abduct his adult sister against her will. When that didn't work, he came back with armed men and tried to burn us out. That's not a family dispute. That's attempted murder." "You got proof he ordered the attack?" "I've got his hired man, Arthur Finch, who delivered threats on Marcus's behalf. I've got 6 witnesses who saw Marcus leading those men, and I've got a barn that's nothing but ashes because of him." Garrett looked uncomfortable. "I'll need statements from all of you, and I'll have to go talk to Marcus, hear his side of things." "His side of things," Eliza repeated. She'd been standing back, letting Rose handle the talking, but something in Garrett's tone made her step forward. "You want to know his side? He'll tell you I'm unstable, that I ran away because I'm not right in the head, that he was just trying to bring his poor, disturbed sister home where she belongs. Now, miss, I didn't say—" "You didn't have to. I can see it in your face. You're already looking for a way to make this not be his fault." Eliza felt anger rising, hot and clean. He beat me for 6 years. Every day he told me I was worthless, that I deserved it, that no one would ever believe me if I told. And he was right, wasn't he? Because here you are, looking at this destroyed property and dead men, and you're still more worried about his rights than mine. Garrett had the grace to look ashamed. That's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying? I'm saying the law needs evidence, proof. I can't just arrest a man because someone says he did something wrong. The evidence is all around you. Eliza gestured at the burned barn, the bullet-riddled house. What more proof do you need? The kind that holds up in court. Garrett sighed, suddenly looking tired. Look, I believe you. I do. But believing and proving are different things. If I arrest Marcus now, his lawyer will have him out in a day. He'll claim self-defense, say he was trying to rescue you from kidnappers, without solid proof of what he did before last night, the abuse, the threats. It's just your word against his. Rose stepped between them, her face carved from granite. Then you'd better start collecting that proof, Sheriff, because if you don't, this isn't over. Marcus will try again, and next time more people will die. Garrett took statements from all of them, wrote down times and details and who shot whom. When he was done, he tipped his hat and promised to do what he could, but his tone suggested it wouldn't be much. Law, Rose said after he'd ridden off, more concerned with procedure than justice, always has been. The next few days were strange. They cleaned up what they could, though the barn was a total loss. The chickens had scattered during the fight, but most of them came back on their own, drawn by the promise of food. The horses that Eliza had freed were found grazing a mile away, unharmed. Small mercies in the midst of devastation. Tom and Jesse stayed on, both of them too injured to travel and too stubborn to leave until they knew Marcus was dealt with. They helped where they could, mending fence and patching bullet holes in the walls. The work was slow but steady. Caleb drew up plans for a new barn, something bigger and better than the old one. Rose muttered that they couldn't afford it, but Eliza caught her studying the plans with something that looked almost like hope. Word continued to spread about what had happened. Other ranchers stopped by, ostensibly to check on Rose, but really to see the damage for themselves. Some offered help. Others just shook their heads and moved on, not wanting to get involved. But one visitor was different. He arrived on the 5th day after the siege, riding alone on a paint horse with saddlebags that clinked with the sound of glass bottles. He was younger than Eliza expected, maybe 30, with ink-stained fingers and a notebook he kept pulling from his pocket to scribble in. "Name's Daniel Cross," he introduced himself. "I work for the Nevada Herald. Heard there was a story out here." Rose looked at him like he was something she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. "We're not interested in being in your newspaper." "With respect, ma'am, that's not really your decision." Something like this. A siege, people killed, all over a woman trying to escape abuse. That's news. People have a right to know about it. People have a right to mind their own business. But Daniel Cross was persistent. He asked questions, took notes, photographed the burned barn and the bullet holes. And when he talked to Eliza, there was something in his approach that was different from the sheriff's. He didn't question whether she was telling the truth. He just asked her to tell it. "Your brother sounds like a dangerous man," he said, after she'd explained what Marcus had done over the years. "And from what I'm hearing around town, he's got connections. Money. People who'll look the other way because it's easier than standing up to him. That's true. Which is exactly why this story needs to be told." Daniel tapped his pencil against his notebook. "You shine light on men like him. It gets harder for them to operate in the shadows. People start asking questions. Law gets pushed to actually do something instead of looking the other way. Or it makes him angrier," Eliza said. "Makes him come after us harder. Maybe. But doing nothing guarantees he gets away with it. At least this way, you're fighting back." She thought about that after he left, about whether making this public would help or hurt. Rose was against it, said it would just bring more attention, more trouble. But Caleb thought differently. "A man like Marcus thrives on people being too scared to speak up," he said that evening. They were sitting on the porch watching the sun set. both of them nursing coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. You tell your story, let people know what he is, that takes away some of his power. It also puts a target on my back. Bigger target than the one already there? Caleb gave her a sideways look. He already tried to burn us out, Eliza. I'm not sure it gets much worse than that. It can always get worse. Sure, but it can also get better. Question is whether you're willing to take the risk. She didn't have an answer for that. Not yet. The article ran a week later. Daniel Cross had worked fast, interviewing people in Copper Creek, collecting statements from the sheriff and the other ranchers who'd come by. He'd even managed to get quotes from some of Marcus's former business partners, men willing to anonymously confirm that yes, Marcus Thorne had a temper, and yes, there had been rumors about how he treated his sister. The headline was stark. Woman flees years of abuse, brother responds with armed assault. Rose read it aloud over breakfast while Eliza tried not to throw up her eggs. Seeing her life laid out in black and white like that, her pain turned into sentences and paragraphs, her story made public for anyone to read, it felt like being stripped naked in the town square. It's a good piece, Rose said when she finished. Fair, accurate, doesn't sensationalize. It makes me sound like a victim. You were a victim. There's no shame in that. I don't want to be defined by what he did to me. Then define yourself differently. Rose folded the paper with sharp, precise movements. The article is what happened. What you do next is who you are. The response to the article was swift and polarizing. Some people in Copper Creek rallied to Marcus's defense, claiming Daniel Cross had written lies, that Eliza was the unstable one, that this was all a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. But others, more than Eliza expected, spoke up in her favor. Women mostly, who wrote letters to the Herald sharing their own stories of brothers or fathers or husbands who'd done similar things. Men who remembered Grace Rourke and other women like her who hadn't escaped. The tide of public opinion began to shift. Not entirely, not quickly, but enough that when Sheriff Garrett showed up again 2 weeks later, he looked more determined than defeated. I've been asking questions, he said, talking to people. Turns out your brother has made a lot of enemies over the years. People he's cheated, threatened, hurt. Most were too scared to speak up before, but that article seems to have loosened some tongues. And? Rose prompted. And I've got enough now to bring charges. Multiple counts of assault, attempted arson, conspiracy to commit murder. With the witnesses willing to testify and the evidence from that night, we might actually make something stick. Eliza felt hope flicker in her chest, dangerous and fragile. You're going to arrest him? I've got a warrant. Me and 4 deputies are riding to Copper Creek this afternoon to bring him in. Garrett shifted his weight, uncomfortable. I need you to know, though, even if we arrest him, there's no guarantee he'll be convicted. He's got money for lawyers. And juries can be unpredictable, especially when it comes to family matters. But it's a chance, Eliza said. It's a chance. They waited. The hardest kind of waiting, the kind where you know something important is happening, but you can't see it or control it or do anything but sit with your anxiety and hope. Eliza tried to work, tried to keep her hands busy with normal tasks, but everything felt surreal. She kept waiting for Marcus to appear on the horizon with more men, more guns, more violence. But he didn't come. And when Garrett returned 3 days later, he was alone. Got him, he said simply. He's in the county lockup awaiting trial. Bail was set high enough that even with his money, he's going to have a hard time making it. The relief that washed over Eliza was so intense it made her dizzy. She had to sit down, had to put her head between her knees and just breathe. He fought it. Garrett continued. Claimed he was innocent, that this was all a conspiracy against him. His lawyer tried every trick in the book to get the charges dismissed. But the judge saw through it. Too many witnesses, too much evidence, even bought and paid for justice has limits. What happens now? Caleb asked. Now we wait for trial. Could be months. The prosecutor's building the case, making sure it's solid. In the meantime, Marcus stays locked up. Garrett looked at Eliza. You'll probably have to testify. Tell the jury what he did to you over the years. It won't be easy. None of this has been easy, Eliza said, but I'll do it, whatever it takes. The trial was set for early autumn. As summer stretched on, hot and dry, life at the boarding house found a new rhythm. The new barn went up slowly, built with lumber they could barely afford and labor from men who worked for promises of future payment. It wasn't as big as Caleb's original plans, but it was solid, defensible, he said. Because even with Marcus in jail, no one was naive enough to think the danger was completely gone. Eliza's nightmares changed. Instead of Marcus's fists, she dreamed of courtrooms, of standing in front of strangers and exposing every humiliation, every moment of weakness, of being cross-examined by lawyers who would try to make her look like a liar or a troublemaker, of juries who might decide that what happened to her wasn't really that bad, that family business should stay family business. "You're going to do fine," Caleb told her one night when he found her sitting outside, too anxious to sleep. "You've already done the hard part. You survived him. You got out. Everything else is just details. Details that could send him to prison or set him free. Either way, you're not going back to him. That's already decided. The trial just determines whether he pays for what he did." "And if he doesn't? If they let him go?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "Then we deal with that when it happens. But you can't live your life preparing for the worst possible outcome. Sometimes you have to trust that justice actually exists. Do you believe that? After what happened to your sister?" "No," he admitted. "But I want to. And wanting to believe something is the first step toward making it real." September brought cooler weather and the trial date. Eliza traveled to the county seat with Rose and Caleb, the three of them staying in a boarding house that wasn't nearly as nice as Rose's. The courtroom was smaller than she'd imagined, wood-paneled and stuffy, with windows that didn't open far enough to let in fresh air. Marcus sat at the defense table in a suit that probably cost more than everything Eliza owned combined. He looked thinner than she remembered, harder. Prison hadn't been kind to him, but when his eyes found hers across the courtroom, there was no remorse in them, only hatred, cold and patient. The trial lasted 5 days. The prosecution called witness after witness. Tom and Jesse testified about the siege, about how Marcus had fired first. Daniel Cross testified about the people in Copper Creek who'd confirmed Marcus's violent reputation. Even Arthur Finch was found and compelled to testify, admitting under oath that Marcus had paid him to deliver threats. And then it was Eliza's turn. Walking to the witness stand felt like walking to her own execution. Every eye in the courtroom was on her. The jury, 10 men and 2 women, all of them strangers, watched her with expressions ranging from sympathy to skepticism. Marcus's lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Morrison, looked at her like she was something he was going to enjoy tearing apart. The prosecutor went first. His name was Hayes, and he'd spent time with Eliza preparing for this, coaching her on how to answer questions. "Stay calm," he'd said. "Tell the truth. Don't let Morrison rattle you." Easier said than done. Hayes led her through her story methodically. When had the abuse started? How often did it happen? Had she ever told anyone? Why had she stayed so long? Eliza answered as best she could, her voice steadier than she felt. She told them about the first time Marcus hit her, 6 months after their parents died. Told them about the years that followed, the escalation from slaps to punches to worse. Told them about being told she was worthless so many times she'd started to believe it. "And why did you finally leave?" and Hayes asked. "Because I realized staying was going to kill me. Maybe not that day or the next, but eventually. I'd become so small, so invisible, that I was barely alive anyway. Leaving was the only way to survive." Morrison's cross-examination was brutal. He questioned every detail, implied she was lying or exaggerating, suggested she'd left because she wanted freedom from responsibility, not because she'd been abused, painted Marcus as a concerned brother trying to care for a difficult sister. "Isn't it true," Morrison said, pacing in front of the jury box, "that your brother provided you with food, shelter, everything you needed? He provided those things, yes, while also beating me. Did you ever seek medical attention for these alleged beatings?" "No." "Why not?" "Because he told me if I did, he'd make it worse, and I believed him." "So we're just supposed to take your word for it? With no medical records, no police reports, nothing but your story?" "You could also take the word of everyone who saw the bruises, who heard him threaten me, who watched him try to burn down a building with me inside it." Morrison's expression flickered with irritation. He tried a different angle. Isn't it possible you misunderstood his intentions? That he was harsh because he cared about you, wanted to make you stronger? No? You seem very certain. I am certain, because caring doesn't leave bruises. Caring doesn't involve holding someone's life hostage just to feel powerful. The exchange went on for hours. By the time Morrison finished, Eliza felt wrung out, hollow. But she'd done it. She'd told her truth in front of strangers and cameras and Marcus himself, and she hadn't broken. The closing arguments came the next day. Hayes laid out the evidence piece by piece, building a case that was damning in its completeness. Morrison argued reasonable doubt, claimed the prosecution had failed to prove intent, suggested the whole thing was a tragic misunderstanding. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they came back, Eliza couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Just sat there gripping Rose's hand while the foreman stood and read the verdict. Guilty. On all counts. The word hit her like a physical blow. Guilty. They'd believed her. They'd looked at all the evidence and all the testimony, and they'd decided that what Marcus did was wrong, was criminal, was worthy of punishment. Marcus's face went white, then red. He started to stand, but the bailiff pushed him back down. His lawyer was already talking about appeals, about errors in the trial. But it didn't matter, not right now. Right now, Marcus was guilty. The sentencing came a week later. The judge, a stern woman named Harriet Klein with steel gray hair and no patience for nonsense, looked at Marcus with something like disgust. "Mr. Thorne," she said, "you have been found guilty of multiple serious crimes, assault, arson, attempted murder. The evidence presented shows a pattern of violence and control spanning many years. You used your position as your sister's guardian to terrorize and abuse her, and when she finally escaped, you responded with even greater violence." Marcus stood rigid, jaw clenched. "This court finds that you pose a significant danger to society and to your sister in particular. Therefore, I am sentencing you to 15 years in the territorial prison. You will serve a minimum of 12 before becoming eligible for parole. And let me be clear, if you ever harm or threaten your sister again, I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your natural life behind bars." 15 years. Eliza let the number sink in. 15 years meant she'd be nearly 40 when he got out. Meant she'd have more than a decade to build a life without fear, without looking over her shoulder. It meant freedom. They left the courthouse in a daze. Outside, Daniel Cross was waiting with his camera and notebook. He wanted a statement, wanted to know how she felt. But Eliza couldn't find words big enough for what she was feeling. Relief, yes, but also grief for all the years Marcus had stolen. Anger that it had taken this long for anyone to help, and underneath it all, a fragile, growing sense of possibility. "I just want to go home," she told him. Rose put an arm around her shoulders. "Then let's go home." The ride back to the boarding house took all day. They didn't talk much, just let the miles pass beneath the wagon wheels while the sun tracked across the sky. When they finally arrived, the property looked different to Eliza. Still scarred from the siege, the new barn was smaller than the old one. The house still bore bullet holes they hadn't gotten around to fixing. But it was standing, solid, real, and it was hers, in a way that the house in Copper Creek had never been. That night, they celebrated quietly. Rose made a special dinner, used the good china she usually reserved for holidays. Tom and Jesse joined them, both mostly healed from their wounds. They toasted to justice, to survival, to the future. "To Eliza," Caleb said, raising his glass, "who proved that sometimes the meek don't just inherit the earth, they fight for it." Eliza smiled despite the tears threatening to spill over. "I couldn't have done any of this without all of you." "Maybe not," Rose said, "but you're the one who took the first step. You're the one who decided to leave. Everything else just followed from that choice." Later, after everyone had gone to bed, Eliza stood outside looking at the stars. The same stars that had been there the night she fled Copper Creek, the night Caleb had pulled her onto his horse and carried her to safety. They looked different now, brighter somehow. Or maybe she was just finally able to see them clearly. She thought about Marcus, locked in a cell 300 miles away. Thought about the judge's words, the jury's verdict. Thought about all the years ahead of her, Years she could fill with anything she wanted instead of just endurance. The future felt vast and terrifying and full of possibility. And for the first time in her life, Eliza Thorne wasn't afraid of it. The weeks after the trial passed in a strange blur of normalcy that Eliza didn't quite trust. She kept waiting for something to go wrong, for some other disaster to arrive at their doorstep. But days turned into weeks, and the only things that came were the usual rhythms of work and weather and the slow process of healing. The boarding house saw more guests now. Word had spread about what happened, and while some people stayed away out of fear or disapproval, others came specifically because of it. Women mostly, traveling alone or fleeing situations that echoed Eliza's own. Rose never turned them away, even when they couldn't pay. She'd just put them to work alongside Eliza, teaching them the same lessons about self-reliance and dignity. "This place is turning into a refuge," Caleb observed one evening. There were 4 new women staying in the upstairs rooms, all of them jumpy and worn-looking. "You realize that, right?" Rose shrugged. "Good. Someone's got to do it. Law sure isn't helping these women. Churches just tell them to pray harder and submit better. At least here they can catch their breath and figure out what comes next." Eliza found herself becoming something unexpected, a guide for these women who were walking the same path she'd walked months earlier. She taught them how to collect eggs without getting pecked, how to haul water efficiently, how to punch without breaking their thumbs, small skills that added up to competence, to control over their own bodies and lives. "Does it get easier?" one of them asked her one afternoon. Her name was Sarah, 19 years old, and 7 months pregnant from a husband who'd beaten her so badly she'd lost hearing in one ear. "The fear, I mean, does it ever really go away?" Eliza considered the question while they hung laundry on the line. "I don't know if it goes away completely, but it gets quieter. You learn to live around it instead of under it." "That doesn't sound like freedom." "Maybe not, but it's better than the alternative." Eliza pinned up one of Caleb's shirts, watched it billow in the wind. "You can't undo what was done to you. Can't erase the memories or make your body forget, but you can build something new on top of it, something that's yours." Sarah touched her swollen belly, expression uncertain. "I don't know if I can do this. Raise a baby alone. Start over. You're not alone. That's the whole point of this place." Eliza met her eyes. "And you're stronger than you think. You already proved that by leaving." It was advice Eliza was still learning to believe herself. Some days she felt capable, grounded in her new life. Other days the weight of what Marcus had done, what he'd stolen from her, felt crushing. She'd catch herself slipping into old patterns, making herself small, apologizing for taking up space. And she'd have to consciously stop, remind herself that she didn't live that way anymore. "You're being too hard on yourself," what Caleb told her one night when he found her scrubbing the kitchen floor with unnecessary violence. "You don't have to be perfect at this." "I'm not trying to be perfect. I'm trying to be different than I was." "You are different. You just don't see it yet because you're still in the middle of becoming." He took the brush from her hands, pulled her to her feet. "Come on, let's go for a ride." They saddled 2 of the horses. Hers was a gentle mare named Clover that Rose had bought specifically for the women who needed to learn, and rode out into the desert under a sky crowded with stars. The air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of sage and dry earth. "Where are we going?" Eliza asked. "Nowhere in particular, just away." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, letting the horses pick their way through the scrub. Eventually they stopped on a small rise that overlooked the valley, the boarding house visible in the distance as a cluster of warm lights against the darkness. "I've been thinking," Caleb said, "about staying." Eliza's heart did something complicated in her chest. "You're always here. I mean, permanently. Not just helping Rose for a while, but making this my home, building something here." He looked at her sidelong. "If that's all right with you." "Why wouldn't it be?" "Because I don't want you to feel obligated, like you owe me something because I helped you. This only works if it's what you want, not what you think you're supposed to want." Eliza turned to face him fully. "Caleb Rourke, in the months I've known you, you've taught me to fight, helped me survive, stood beside me when my brother tried to burn us out. You've never once made me feel like I owed you anything. Why would you start now? Because things are different now. Marcus is gone. You're safe. You don't need protection anymore. Maybe not, but I might want companionship. There's a difference. His expression shifted, something guarded in it relaxing. Companionship, huh? Unless you've got other plans, some other place you need to be. I've been drifting for 10 years since Grace died. Never saw a reason to put down roots anywhere. He gestured at the valley spread below them. But this place, these people, you, it feels like something worth staying for. They sat there on their horses, close enough that their legs nearly touched, and Eliza felt the future opening up in front of her. Not perfect, not easy, but hers to shape instead of having it shaped for her. Then stay, she said simply. The smile that crossed his face was worth more than any promise he could have made. Winter came early that year, bringing cold that settled into bones and snow that made the roads nearly impassable. The boarding house filled up with travelers trapped by weather, and for weeks the common room was constantly crowded with people seeking warmth and shelter. Rose grumbled about the work, but Eliza caught her smiling sometimes when she thought no one was looking. The old woman had built this place to help people, and now it was doing exactly that on a scale she'd never managed alone. "We're going to need to expand," Rose announced one morning over breakfast. "Add more rooms, maybe a separate building for the women who need longer-term shelter. Can't keep stuffing people into every available corner." "That takes money," Caleb pointed out. "Then we'll find money. Take on investors, maybe, or set up some kind of charitable foundation." Rose stabbed at her eggs. "Point is, what we're doing here matters, and we should do more of it." Over the following months, that's exactly what they did. Rose reached out to wealthy ranchers and businessmen, women's groups in the cities, anyone who might have resources to spare. Some ignored her. Others contributed small amounts. But a few, particularly women who'd survived situations similar to Eliza's, gave generously. By spring, they'd broken ground on a new building. Nothing fancy, just a solid structure with 6 small rooms and a communal kitchen. A place where women could stay for weeks or months while they figured out their next steps. Rose wanted to call it a shelter, but Eliza suggested something different. "Call it the Grace House," she said. "After Caleb's sister. After all the women who didn't make it out." Caleb's eyes went bright with something that might have been tears, but he blinked them away and nodded. She'd have liked that. The work of building kept them all busy through the summer. Caleb oversaw the construction, teaching some of the women basic carpentry as they went. Eliza managed the boarding house day to day, freeing Rose up to handle the business and fundraising side. It was hard work, the kind that left them exhausted at the end of each day. But it was good work, purposeful. One afternoon in late July, a letter arrived from the territorial prison. Eliza's hand shook as she opened it, certain it would be from Marcus. But the handwriting was different, neat and official. It was from the warden. Marcus had been involved in a fight with another prisoner. He'd lost badly, taken a beating that left him in the infirmary for 3 weeks. The warden wanted Eliza to know that additional time had been added to his sentence for instigating the violence. "You all right?" Caleb asked. He'd found her sitting on the porch steps, letter crumpled in her fist. "He's hurt. In prison. Someone finally did to him what he did to me for years." She looked up at Caleb, searching his face. "I should feel good about that, right? Like justice is being served, but I just feel empty." "That's because you're not like him. Revenge doesn't actually fix anything, doesn't undo the damage or heal the wounds. It just creates more of the same." Caleb sat beside her. "Being empty is better than being full of hate. Means there's room for other things to grow." She wanted to believe that. Wanted to think that she could fill the spaces Marcus had carved out with something better than bitterness. But some days it was hard to imagine what that would even look like. The answer came gradually, built piece by piece through the work they were doing. Every woman who passed through their doors, every skill learned, every small victory celebrated. These things accumulated into something larger, a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with Marcus and everything to do with the life Eliza was actively building. The Grace House opened in September, 1 year and 3 months after Eliza had first fled Copper Creek. They held a small ceremony, nothing fancy. Rose said a few words about why this work mattered. Caleb planted a tree out front, a young oak that would take decades to reach its full height, And Eliza stood there looking at this building that existed because she'd survived, because she'd refused to stay broken, and felt something shift inside her. She wasn't defined by what Marcus had done anymore. Wasn't just the girl who'd escaped abuse. She was someone who'd taken that pain and turned it into something useful, something that helped others. "You did good," Rose told her afterward. The older woman's voice was gruff, but her eyes were soft. "Real good. Your mama would be proud." The words hit harder than Eliza expected. She'd spent so long thinking about survival that she'd forgotten about legacy, about what kind of person she wanted to be beyond just someone who wasn't a victim anymore. "Thank you," she managed, "for everything. For taking me in when you didn't have to. For teaching me that I could be more than what he made me. I didn't make you anything, just gave you space to remember who you were before he tried to break you." Rose squeezed her shoulder. "The rest was all you." That evening, Eliza and Caleb walked out to their usual spot overlooking the valley. The Grace house was visible now, alongside the main boarding house, two buildings standing together like a promise kept. "I've been thinking," Eliza said, "about the future, about what comes next. And I think I want to do more than just run a shelter. I want to advocate, work with lawyers, judges, sheriffs, try to change the laws that make it so hard for women to leave dangerous situations." She looked at him. "That probably sounds naive. Sounds necessary. Laws don't change themselves. Takes people willing to fight for it. It's going to be hard. Probably take years. Most people will think I'm wasting my time." "Probably. But you've never been much concerned with what most people think." Caleb took her hand, laced his fingers through hers. "And you won't be doing it alone." They sat there as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and deep red. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out and was answered. The desert stretched away on all sides, vast and unforgiving and beautiful. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you'd never left Copper Creek?" Caleb asked. "Sometimes, usually when I'm being morbid." Eliza considered the question seriously. "I think I'd be dead by now, or so broken that death would have been kinder." "But you're not." "No, I'm here, building things, helping people, living." She turned to look at him. "And I'm happy. Not every minute of every day, but enough that it matters. Is that strange?" "Why would it be strange?" "Because happiness feels like something I'm not supposed to have, like I haven't earned it yet." Caleb shook his head. "You don't earn happiness. You just grab it when it shows up and hold on as hard as you can. And if it helps, I'm happy too. Happier than I've been in 10 years. Because of the work we're doing? Because of you." He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Because you showed me that good things can come from terrible situations if you're willing to work for them. Because every time I see you teaching some scared woman how to stand up for herself, I remember why any of this matters." Eliza felt her throat tighten. "Caleb, I'm not asking for anything. Just want you to know. You changed my life by walking into it, made me remember that I could build something instead of just drifting." She kissed him then, soft and brief and full of possibility. When she pulled back, he was smiling. "What was that for?" "For being you, for staying, for making me believe that I could have this, whatever this is, without it being taken away. It's not going anywhere, neither am I." The years that followed proved him right. They built more structures, helped more women, slowly created a network of shelters across the territory. Eliza did exactly what she'd planned, worked with lawyers and judges, and anyone who would listen to change the laws around domestic violence and women's rights. It was slow, frustrating work. For every small victory, there were a dozen setbacks. But she kept pushing, kept fighting, because she knew firsthand what was at stake. Rose passed away 3 winters later, peacefully in her sleep at the age of 67. They buried her on the property she'd loved, under the oak tree Caleb had planted. Eliza grieved hard and deep, mourning not just Rose, but the mother figure she'd never thought she'd have again. "She'd want you to keep going," Caleb said at the funeral. "Keep building, keep helping. That was her whole life, making sure people who needed shelter could find it." So they did. The boarding house became the Rose Garrett Foundation, named for the woman who'd started it all. The Grace House expanded into Grace Houses, plural, scattered across Nevada and into California. And Eliza became known not as the girl who'd escaped abuse, but as the woman who'd turned her survival into a movement. She and Caleb married in a simple ceremony 5 years after they met. No fancy church, no elaborate celebration, just vows spoken under open sky with the people they'd helped standing witness. Sarah was there with her daughter, now 4 years old and full of life. Tom and Jesse came, both retired from ranch work but still ready to help if needed. And dozens of women whose names Eliza had learned, whose stories she'd heard, whose lives had been changed by finding refuge when they needed it most. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Eliza said on their wedding night. They were sitting outside their small house, built on the property, close enough to help with the shelters, but far enough to have privacy. "I think about the girl I was when I left Copper Creek, how scared she was, how certain she was that she'd never amount to anything. And I wish I could go back and tell her it gets better, that the pain doesn't last forever, that she's going to build something beautiful out of all that ugliness." Caleb pulled her close. Maybe she knows. Maybe some part of her knew even then, or she wouldn't have had the courage to leave. Maybe. They sat together in the darkness, two people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and built something lasting from it. The shelters hummed with quiet life around them, women sleeping safely, children being raised without fear, futures being imagined and planned. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. There were still setbacks and struggles, still women they couldn't save, still laws that refused to change. Marcus was still alive in prison somewhere, a ghost that occasionally haunted Eliza's dreams. But those dreams were rarer now, their power diminished by years of living a life that had nothing to do with him. One morning, nearly 7 years after the trial, Eliza woke to find Caleb already up and dressed. "Where are you going so early?" she asked. "Got a telegram yesterday. Didn't want to mention it until I was sure." He sat on the edge of the bed. "Marcus died 3 days ago. Heart failure," they said. He was only 42. Eliza absorbed this information slowly. Marcus, dead. The man who'd haunted her for so long, who'd defined so much of her life through his violence and control. Gone. "How do you feel?" Caleb asked. She searched herself honestly. Relieved, sad, angry that he gets to escape while the women he hurt have to live with what he did forever. She paused. "But mostly, I just feel done. Like a chapter I've been trying to close for years finally has an ending. You don't have to go to the funeral if they have one. I know, and I won't." Eliza got out of bed, crossed to the window. Outside, the sun was rising over the valley, painting everything gold. "He doesn't get any more of my time, not even for closure." And that was that. Marcus Thorne was dead, and Eliza Thorne, now Eliza Rourke, continued living. She didn't attend his funeral, didn't shed tears over his grave. She simply noted his passing the way you'd note the weather and moved on with her day. Because that's what she'd learned in all the years since fleeing Copper Creek. That healing wasn't about the people who hurt you finally getting what they deserved. It was about building a life so full and purposeful that they became irrelevant. It was about taking all that pain and fear and transforming it into something that helped others. 10 years after she'd first arrived at Rose's boarding house, Eliza stood in front of the territorial legislature. She was 32 years old, dressed in her best clothes, holding notes she'd written and rewritten a dozen times. Around her sat other women with similar stories, similar scars, similar determination to make things different for the next generation. They were there to testify in support of new legislation, laws that would make it easier for women to leave violent situations, that would give them legal protection, that would hold abusers accountable in ways the current system didn't. "My name is Eliza Rourke," she began. Her voice was steady, clear. "And I'm here to tell you about what happens when the law fails to protect its most vulnerable citizens." She told her story, not in the halting, uncertain way she'd told it at Marcus's trial, but with the confidence of someone who'd survived and thrived. She talked about the years of abuse, yes, but she also talked about the years after, about the shelters they'd built, the women they'd helped, the lives that had been saved because someone had finally offered an alternative to endurance. "The question before you today isn't whether domestic violence exists," she concluded. "We all know it does. The question is whether you're willing to do something about it. Whether you're willing to give women like me a legal framework that supports escape instead of demanding endurance. Whether you're brave enough to say that family privacy doesn't extend to violence and control. The legislation passed. Not unanimously, not easily, but it passed. And Eliza stood there in the gallery watching history being made, watching laws change because people had been willing to speak up and felt the weight of everything she'd survived settle into something like peace. That evening, she and Caleb sat on their porch watching the sunset. The shelters were full, as always. Somewhere inside, women were learning to cook, to read, to fight back. Children were playing games they'd never been allowed to play before. Lives were being rebuilt from ashes. "You did it," Caleb said. "Changed the law, made it better. We did it, all of us together." Eliza leaned against him, tired but satisfied. "It's not perfect, won't solve everything, but it's better than it was. Better is all anyone can ask for." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade from the sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new women in need of help, new battles to fight. But tonight they could rest in the knowledge that they'd made a difference, that Eliza Thorne, once told she was worthless, had proven her value by refusing to accept that judgment. "What do you think happens next?" Caleb asked. Eliza smiled. "Whatever we make happen. That's the beautiful thing about surviving. You get to decide what comes after." And she had decided, had chosen to build instead of break, to help instead of hide, to turn her pain into purpose. It hadn't been easy, healing never was, but it had been worth it. Because in the end, worth wasn't something given by others or taken away by violence. It was something you claimed for yourself, piece by piece, day by day, until you looked in the mirror and recognized the person staring back, until you could say without hesitation that your life mattered, that you mattered, not because of what had been done to you, but because of what you'd done with what remained. Eliza Rourke had started as nothing, according to the man who tried to break her. But she'd ended up as something far more important, someone who proved that broken things could be remade into something stronger, that victims could become advocates, that the girl at the edge of breaking could step back and build an entirely different life. And in doing so, she'd given that same possibility to hundreds of other women, had shown them through action rather than words that worth wasn't bestowed by others or destroyed by violence. It was inherent, unbreakable, eternal. She'd been told she was worthless. She'd proven them wrong by living. And that, in the end, was the only victory that mattered.